Welcome to A Quick Note, where we delve into fascinating historical stories. Today, we're exploring the legacy of Vasco da Gama, a pivotal figure in Portugal's colonial history. His voyages shaped the course of exploration and trade routes. But, as we'll discover, his impact is not without controversy. Meet Vasco da Gama, the guy who played a big role in making the Portuguese Empire super powerful. His mission? To find a better way to trade with the cool stuff from the East. While the Spanish were busy exploring the Americas, the Portuguese had their eyes set on southern and eastern Asia. Why? Because that's where the good stuff was: gold, fancy spices, silk, and other awesome treasures. The problem was, the trade route from Portugal to the east was a risky journey over land, taking forever and filled with dangers. So, the Portuguese needed a game changer. They wanted a new route over the ocean, and they picked Vasco da Gama to figure it out. This is the story of how he pulled off this daring adventure. Vasco da Gama's early life. Vasco da Gama, the adventurous guy we're talking about, was born in 1460. His family was part of the lower nobility, not super fancy, but not too shabby either. His dad started as a household knight and worked his way up in government, while his mom came from a well-off and well-connected family. As Vasco grew up, he followed in his dad's cool footsteps and joined the Order of Santiago, a knightly group. The king really liked this order, so being part of it meant good things for Vasco's future. When he was about 22, in 1482, da Gama got his first big mission as a commander. His job? Take down some French ships that were causing trouble for Portuguese ships. And guess what? He rocked it. Vasco da Gama showed everyone that he was seriously good at what he did. The first voyage. On July 8, 1497, Vasco da Gama set sail from Lisbon with 4 ships and 170 crew members. Their mission? To sail around the Cape of Good Hope, the tip of Africa, and make their way into the Indian Ocean toward the Indian subcontinent. Vasco brought along his brother Paulo and the famous navigator Bartholomew Dias, who was the first to navigate around the southern tip of Africa. Bartholomew's wisdom was like gold as they sailed down Africa's western coast. And don't forget the 3 interpreters: 2 spoke Arabic, and the 3rd knew various Bantu dialects. The journey had its challenges with storms, but nothing too crazy. The team handled it well, making stops along the way to restock supplies by anchoring along the coast. They were like a floating squad, making their way through the waters and facing whatever challenges came their way. After rounding the Cape, on December 16, Vasco da Gama's crew sailed past the Great Fish River, entering uncharted territory that no European had explored before. As Christmas drew near, da Gama decided to give a special name to the coast they were passing, honoring the birth of Christ. And that's how the land of Natal got its name. Today, a province in South Africa still carries that name, KwaZulu-Natal. They continued sailing along the coast, reaching Mozambique in January 1498, and kept going until they reached the mouth of the River of Good Omens, which we now know as the Zambezi River. Here, they set up a statue to mark Portugal and their epic journey. Da Gama decided to take a breather at this spot, especially since many crew members were dealing with scurvy after the long voyage. So, they took about a month to rest and recover. After a good rest, Vasco da Gama continued his journey, heading north along the coast until he reached the small island of Mozambique. The island was ruled by the Sultan of Mozambique, and worried about potential hostility towards Christians, da Gama pretended to be a Muslim. This act got him an audience with the Sultan, and they even exchanged gifts. However, suspicion grew among the island's people, leading them to kick da Gama's party off the island. As they sailed away, Vasco da Gama fired his cannons into the city as a sort of payback. Heading further north, da Gama and his crew raided and plundered several merchant ships before becoming the first Europeans to reach Mombasa by sea. Unfortunately, their presence wasn't exactly welcome, and they had to make a quick escape to avoid trouble with the locals once again. It seems like da Gama's journey was turning out to be quite an adventure. Heading further north, Vasco da Gama's next destination was the port city of Malindi. Unlike their experience in Mombasa, Malindi was in a bit of a squabble with Mombasa and gave da Gama and his crew a warmer welcome. It was in Malindi that da Gama met an Indian navigator who would become a crucial ally. This navigator helped da Gama figure out the route across the sea from East Africa to India. Teamwork was clearly becoming a key part of da Gama's journey. In May 1498, Vasco da Gama reached Calicut, India, and was welcomed with a grand procession by the Zamorin, the king of the region. The Zamorin even hurried back to Calicut from Panani upon hearing about the European fleet's arrival. However, despite the impressive gifts da Gama brought, the ruler wasn't too impressed. Some Muslim traders, seeing him as a competitor, spread the word that da Gama was just a common pirate. To make matters worse, the Zamorin insisted that da Gama follow the same rules as any other merchant, including paying customs duty, preferably in gold. This decision upset da Gama, and in his frustration, he took some locals by force and decided to leave India. He raised the anchor, starting the long journey back home. Facing the challenge of sailing against the wind, it took Vasco da Gama 132 days to get back to the African coast. Tired and with half of his crew lost during the tough journey, many others were dealing with scurvy. Da Gama decided to take a break and stop at Malindi to rest and refuel. When he resumed the journey, only 2 out of the 4 ships that initially set sail from Lisbon were still with him. The return trip was turning out to be just as challenging as the journey to India. The journey back had its ups and downs. Smooth sailing initially, rounding the Cape and entering the Atlantic, the 2 ships eventually got separated at some unknown point, although both eventually made it back to Portugal. Tragedy struck when they were near Cape Verde. Vasco da Gama's brother, Paulo, fell seriously ill. In a tough decision, da Gama handed over command of his ship and chose to stay in Cape Verde with his ailing brother. Later, they caught a ride to Portugal on a ship from Guinea. However, Paulo sadly passed away during the journey, and when they reached the Azores, Vasco disembarked. He gave his brother a proper burial and spent some time mourning. Eventually, he found a way back to Lisbon, marking the end of a journey that had taken over 2 years to complete. It was a challenging and eventful adventure for Vasco da Gama. Back in Portugal, Vasco da Gama was welcomed as a hero. Despite the challenges with the Calicut Zamorin, his expedition turned out to be a success. In the following years, Portugal regularly sent trading expeditions following da Gama's route to conduct trade with India. In recognition of his achievements, the King of Portugal, Manuel I, rewarded Vasco da Gama with the town of Sines as his personal domain. However, this decision stirred trouble with the Order of Santiago, who still technically owned the town, and to which da Gama belonged as a knight. The tension between da Gama and the order grew, leading Vasco to resign from the Order of Santiago and join the rival Order of Christ. In 1501, he tied the knot with Catarina de Tade, the daughter of a wealthy nobleman. Da Gama's return home marked not only the triumph of his expedition but also a significant chapter in his personal life. While Vasco da Gama was basking in his success, trouble brewed elsewhere. Another trading armada sent to Calicut ended in disaster. A dispute with the local merchants' guild in Calicut escalated into a riot, resulting in the death of 70 Portuguese. In retaliation, the Portuguese bombarded the city, sparking a full-blown war between Calicut and Portugal. In response to these turbulent events, da Gama stepped up. He volunteered to take charge of the upcoming 4th Armada scheduled to set sail in 1502. It seems like even in times of conflict, Vasco da Gama was ready to navigate the challenges for the greater good of Portugal. In command of a fleet of 20 ships, Vasco da Gama's second voyage was dispatched to resolve the conflict with the Calicut Zamorin. The goal was to make the Zamorin pay tribute to Portugal. On the journey to Calicut, the expedition achieved some successes. They connected with the gold trading port of Sofala and compelled the Kilwa Sultanate, situated in present-day Tanzania, to pay tribute. In October 1502, da Gama reached the Indian coast and encountered a vessel carrying 400 Muslim pilgrims. He plundered the ship, imprisoned its passengers, and set it ablaze. Only 20 children were spared, but they were forced to convert to Christianity. The second voyage of Vasco da Gama was marked by both diplomatic maneuvering and confrontations that left a lasting impact on the regions they encountered. When Vasco da Gama arrived at the coast of Calicut, the Zamorin recognized that da Gama was prepared to resort to significant violence. In response, the Zamorin attempted a diplomatic approach with the Portuguese captain. Concurrently, he sent a letter to his rebellious vassal, the ruler of Cochin, seeking help against the Portuguese threat. Surprisingly, the ruler of Cochin forwarded the letter to da Gama instead. Seizing the opportunity, da Gama intensified his demands, now insisting that the Zamorin expel all Muslims from Calicut. The situation was becoming increasingly complex, with diplomatic maneuvers and shifting alliances at play. The Zamorin attempted diplomatic talks by sending his high priest to negotiate with Vasco da Gama. However, da Gama showed no interest in negotiation. Instead, he brutally mutilated the emissary by cutting off his ears and lips and sewing dog ears onto his head before sending him back. In retaliation, the Portuguese opened fire on the city, causing significant damage. The Zamorin, not backing down, dispatched a fleet for battle. This clash became known as the Battle of Calicut, and in January 1503, Vasco da Gama emerged victorious, securing a decisive win in the face of the conflict. The events unfolded as a brutal chapter in the history of the interactions between the Portuguese and the Calicut Zamorin. The death of Vasco da Gama. Despite achieving military successes, Vasco da Gama's mission in Calicut was ultimately deemed a failure. The Zamorin remained defiant, and Portuguese interests faced the threat of reprisals. Details about how da Gama was received upon his return are limited, but it's likely that he fell out of favor with the king. Only after the death of King Manuel I and the ascension of John III did da Gama's fortunes change. In 1524, he was appointed as the viceroy of Portuguese possessions in India. However, tragedy struck soon after his arrival in Cochin that same year. Vasco da Gama contracted malaria and passed away. His remains were brought back to Portugal 15 years later. The later part of da Gama's life was marked by a complex mix of achievements and challenges, ultimately leaving a lasting impact on the history of Portuguese exploration and colonial endeavors. Vasco da Gama stands as a pivotal figure in Portugal's colonial history, playing a crucial role in the empire's success. His voyages opened up new trade routes, offering valuable lessons to Portugal on how to establish and maintain its overseas territories. His legacy, however, evokes mixed sentiments today. While his achievements are undeniably significant, his methods, like those of many explorers and conquerors of his time, were harsh and brutal. Statues and memorials dedicated to Vasco da Gama still exist, but his historical image is complex. Many victims of colonialism, particularly in India, perceive him as an antagonist due to the harsh consequences of European expansion. Recognizing both his accomplishments and the ethical questions surrounding his actions, Vasco da Gama's legacy remains a subject of debate and reflection in the ongoing assessment of colonial history. And there you have it, a quick dive into the complex legacy of Vasco da Gama. If you enjoyed this historical insight, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to A Quick Note, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our quick explorations of intriguing topics. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.